It is said that every desert was once a question. At dusk, when the sun loosens its grip and the horizon softens into amber and ash, the dunes begin to glow as if lit from within. Their crests burn briefly, like embers remembering fire, and the wind moves low across their faces, careful, deliberate. Some swear that if you listen closely in this hour, when day exhales into night, you can smell salt on the breath of the air, a taste not meant for dry places, a memory out of time. And so the quiet question opens itself. How does a desert remember the weight of water? Not with sound, perhaps, not with motion, but with stillness so deep it feels intentional, with silence layered upon silence, like folded cloth. Beneath the sand, far below the wandering feet of travelers and stars, something old remains awake. It is said that beneath these dunes, beneath this vast and listening land, the ocean is sleeping. Long before the desert learned the language of thirst, before dust became its dominant prayer, water ruled here. Not as a sudden flood or violent force, but as a patient presence. Tides once rose and fell under unfamiliar constellations. Moonlight traced silver paths across inland seas. The Sahara, now a name spoken with reverence and awe, was once a breathing green world, marked by rivers that braided themselves gently across the land. In forgotten corners of the earth, memory lingers longer than we expect. Shells, once carried by waves, now rest locked in stone. Coral forms, delicate, spiral, oceanic, lie buried beneath layers of dust, as if sealed away in a sacred chamber. Fish, their bodies pressed into rock, stare outward with hollow patience, witnesses to a world that no longer answers them. These are not myths, not dreams, but quiet truths etched into the bones of the land. Some believe the desert does not erase, it preserves. Where memory fades for us, it deepens for the earth. There was a time, whispered by stone and shadow, when rain spoke softly here, when clouds gathered without fear and water returned again and again, not as a stranger but as kin. Lakes opened like open palms, reflecting starlight in their stillness. Rivers carried silt and song, nourishing grasses, animals, and early human footsteps that followed the gentle promise of water. Marked by the moon, herds moved slowly. Crocodiles slid through reeds where now only wind passes. People gathered not in survival alone, but in ceremony, painting stories onto stone walls, carving swimmers into rock faces that today overlook nothing but air. The desert remembers these gestures. It remembers bodies moving through water, arms extended, breath held. It remembers laughter muffled by ripples. It remembers the weight of the ocean pressing lightly, lovingly, upon its skin. Whispers tell us that the shoreline was never fixed, that the sea wandered, advancing and retreating like thought itself. Ancient storytellers spoke of inland oceans that appeared and vanished, of waters that came without warning and left without farewell. Some dismissed these as symbols, others as exaggeration. Yet beneath the silence, the land continues to testify. Lake beds lie cracked and pale, shaped like sleeping faces. Salt flats shimmer like frozen waves. Layers of sediment rest atop one another like unread scrolls, each one a chapter written in pressure and time. Beneath the silence, there is structure. Beneath the stillness, order. It is said that time does not move forward here. It folds inward. To walk across the Sahara is to step across centuries without noticing. A footfall may pass over what was once shoreline, once seabed, once the soft floor of a living ocean. The sand does not resist, it receives, and in this receiving something sacred unfolds. The desert is often described as empty, but emptiness too can be a form of fullness, a vessel waiting, a breath held so long it becomes prayer. Some believe the desert is not dead, but resting, resting after abundance, resting after song. In the deepening night, stars emerge, sharp, unblinking, ancient. They are not the same stars that once reflected in these waters, yet they feel familiar, as if carrying messages forward. Constellations shift over millennia, but their watching remains. They look down upon dunes that ripple like frozen waves, upon shadows that move like currents. The wind continues its slow chant. If you listen long enough, it begins to sound like water. A hush within a hush. Grains of sand brush against one another with a sound not unlike distant surf. The illusion is gentle, persistent, enough to make the heart wonder. It is said that ancient rivers still exist here, not as water but as paths. Invisible channels where moisture once flowed, now guiding the movement of air, of life, of memory. Even today, life follows these hidden lines. Plants emerge where the ground remembers being wet. Animals pause where water once gathered. People settle where the earth feels less forgetful. Contradictions remain, unresolved and sacred. How could an ocean vanish so completely? How could abundance turn to vastness without witness? Some point to cycles older than names, to the slow dance of the planet, to shifts in tilt and breath, to monsoons that once traveled farther north, carrying rain like a blessing. Others speak of divine withdrawal, of a sacred balance tipping, of waters called back to the edges of the world. Perhaps all are true, perhaps none are complete. The desert does not correct us. It listens. As the story deepens, curiosity softens into something quieter. Not sorrow exactly, not grief, but a gentle melancholy, like remembering a song you once loved but can no longer fully recall. You know it mattered. You feel its shape, yet the words have slipped beyond reach. This is the mourning without grief. To stand here is to sense that loss can be tender, that absence can be holy, that what has withdrawn may still be near, just beyond perception. The ocean, it seems, did not die. It receded, and in its retreat it left behind offerings, shells, stone, memory, each one a small gate into the past, not meant to be opened forcefully, only approached with patience. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. As night deepens, the desert cools. Heat drains slowly from the sand, as if the land is exhaling after a long day of remembering. The dunes darken, their ember glow fading into silver and blue. Moonlight marks their curves, revealing patterns too large to comprehend, too ancient to question. Here, in this hour, the desert feels vast, not because it is empty, but because it is full of time. Beneath the sand, beneath the weightless stars, the ocean sleeps, not in chains, not in loss, but in trust. Trust that memory does not require presence, that what once was can still shape what is. Perhaps the land is holding its breath, perhaps it is waiting for water that remembers its name. And so the chapter closes not with an answer, but with a pause, a sacred uncertainty. The ocean recedes once more into silence, leaving behind the hush of dunes, the slow rhythm of wind, and the feeling that something immense is resting just beneath the surface, listening, dreaming, waiting. Where memory fades, sleep begins. It is said that moonlight remembers more than we do. In forgotten corners of the earth, when night settles gently and the sky loosens its grip on color, the moon descends not as light alone, but as a listener. Its pale breath touches stone walls hidden among cliffs and valleys, places where silence has learned to wait. And there, under its calm gaze, animals begin to move again. Giraffes stretch their long necks toward stars that no longer guide them. Cattle stand in patient lines, their horns curved like crescent moons. Human figures swim across stone, arms extended, bodies suspended forever in a liquid sky that no longer falls as rain. These carvings do not shout, they do not explain themselves, they simply endure. And so the invitation opens, quietly and without demand. How could a desert once breathe green? The Sahara, now spoken of as an endless veil of dust and distance, once wore another face. Beneath this same moon, grasses swayed like slow water. Wide clouds gathered without fear. Rain did not arrive as a miracle, but as a habit. It came often enough to be trusted, gently enough to be loved. Some believe this land was once a garden without walls. Whispers tell us that rivers traced silver paths across the earth, not hurried, not forced. Lakes opened their still eyes beneath celestial patterns, reflecting constellations that drifted differently then. The air itself carried moisture, a softness now difficult to imagine. Breath was easier. Life moved outward, expansive and unguarded. Human footsteps followed migrating stars. They did not rush. They did not conquer. They followed rhythms written in sky and soil. Camps formed where water lingered. Stories gathered around firelight. Hands pressed pigment into stone, not to dominate time, but to speak with it. These images, giraffes, swimmers, herds, are not decorations. They are memories fixed in place, star-marked and sacred. Archaeology names them. Science dates them. But beneath the silence, something else hums. A contradiction. The mind resists it at first. A desert that was once green. A place of abundance now defined by absence. And yet, the evidence waits patiently, buried but not erased. Beneath layers of dust, pollen rests like sleep. Beneath dunes, ancient soil still remembers moisture. Beneath rock shelters, charcoal whispers of hearths lit when rain was expected, not feared. It is said that climate here moved like breath. Not suddenly, not violently, but slowly, thoughtfully, as if the earth itself was deciding how much to reveal, how much to withdraw. Monsoon winds once traveled farther north, carrying rain like a promise. Seasons arrived with regularity, then hesitation, then absence. The green veil did not tear, it thinned. Grasslands retreated without panic, lakes shrank without protest. Animals followed water southward, step by patient step. People followed too, gathering their stories, their tools, their songs. No single moment marked the end, no trumpet announced the change, only silence growing deeper. Myths rose where certainty faded. Some spoke of paradise lost, not through punishment, but through forgetting. Others told of a sacred balance, a cycle older than language, where lands bloom and rest in turns too vast for human grief. Stories of Eden-like worlds, of ancestral homelands swallowed by time, drifted across generations like seeds carried on wind. Perhaps these myths were not inventions. Perhaps they were memories softened by age. The Sahara, once a cradle, became a threshold, a place to cross rather than inhabit. And yet, it never fully released what it had been. It kept its images. It kept its signs. Marked by the moon, the stone walls continued to glow. Emotion drifts here like pollen, light, almost unnoticed. Wonder comes first. The astonishment of realizing that this land once held such life, such color, such ease. Then, gently, loss arrives. Not sharp, not bitter, just present. A quiet loss, the kind that does not demand tears, only acknowledgement. Standing before these carvings, one feels watched, not by spirits, but by time itself. The figures seem to ask nothing. They simply exist, suspended between what was and what is, between water and dust, between breath and stillness. Beneath the silence, questions remain. Did the people know the green veil was lifting? Did they sense the rains would not return as before? Or did the change arrive so slowly that it felt like permanence? Some believe adaptation is humanity's oldest ritual. Evidence suggests no sudden collapse here, no single catastrophe. Instead, a gradual turning. Tools changed, routes shifted, stories adjusted their direction. Life followed water, as it always had, leaving behind traces not of despair, but of movement. The desert did not chase them away. It simply became something else. Ruins are rare here. Stone cities do not crumble because stone cities were never needed. This was a world of openness, of temporary dwellings aligned with seasons rather than walls. When the green veil lifted, there were few monuments to mourn. Only rock art remained, and perhaps that is why it feels so intimate. These images were not meant to last forever, Yet they have, not through force but through alignment. Stone, dust, and time agreed to hold them. It is said that memory clings best where it is not burdened. As night deepens, the desert cools. The moon climbs higher, casting long shadows that ripple across sand like echoes of grass. In this light, it is easier to imagine the past not as gone, but as resting nearby. The wind brushes across the land with a softness that feels intentional, as if it too remembers rain. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The green veil did not vanish in anger. It lifted with patience, layer by layer, season by season, allowing life to follow, allowing memory to remain. What was left behind was not emptiness, but pause. Where memory fades, the land listens. And so the chapter closes without resolution. The question remains suspended like dust in moonlight. Cycles older than language continue their slow turning, beyond judgment, beyond urgency. The Sahara stands as it is now, vast, quiet, and full of held breath. Perhaps the green will return. Perhaps it already has, somewhere beyond our measure. Or perhaps this too is part of the ritual, to witness what once was, to honor what remains, and to rest gently within the mystery. Marked by the moon, the stone animals watch as sleep approaches. The veil settles, not green, not dust, but silence, and in that silence the land continues its ancient remembering, long after our listening softens into dreams. It is said that stone never forgets. In forgotten corners of the earth, where night descends slowly and the stars take their places one by one, ancient lakebeds lie exposed beneath the open sky. They are cracked like sleeping skin, patterned with lines that seem almost deliberate, as if drawn by a careful hand. Moonlight settles into these fractures, filling them with silver, and for a moment the ground looks less like earth and more like something breathing. This is the invitation. A silent threshold where the land asks us to listen, not with urgency, not with expectation, but with patience. Here, beneath the stillness, the stones are awake. They do not speak in words, they speak in layers. Sedimentary bands rise gently from the ground, stacked like pages in a sealed book that has never been opened by human hands. Each stratum rests upon another, pressed together by time so vast it feels ceremonial. Dust settles into their edges, salt clings to their surfaces, and within them something lingers, the breath of former storms. It is said that rain once returned here again and again, not as a stranger, but as a pilgrim. It traveled long distances, guided by winds older than memory, arriving softly, leaving slowly. Water gathered in these basins, spread across the land, and then rested. It settled into the earth, whispering into stone. Beneath the silence, the stones listened. Fossilized shorelines curve gently across the land, their shapes still faithful to waves that no longer move. Salt flats stretch outward like pale mirrors, shimmering under starlight, reflecting constellations that have shifted, yet remain familiar. In daylight, these places appear harsh, blinding, almost empty, but at night they soften. They reveal their purpose. They are not ruins, they are records. Each grain of salt remembers evaporation. Each ripple frozen in rock remembers water passing over it, shaping it without force. There is a sacred intimacy here, as if the land is confessing softly, revealing its history only to those willing to sit quietly enough. Some believe the stones learned patience from the rain, that every drop taught them how to wait. In ancient telling, sky gods once walked above this land. They gathered clouds in woven cloaks and released them when the earth called upward. Promised floods arrived not to destroy, but to renew. Rivers were said to be gifts carried down from the heavens, their courses guided by celestial patterns. Whispers tell us that prayers once rose from this soil, answered not with fire, but with water. Science, too, bends close here, reading the same stones with different names. It speaks of epochs and climates, of slow oscillations, of rains that followed predictable rhythms before retreating beyond reach. It describes lake cycles measured in millennia, shorelines traced and retraced as water advanced and withdrew. Legend and measurement overlap, not in conflict, but in quiet agreement. Both acknowledge what was. Both bow to what remains. To walk across these stones is to move through time without crossing distance. A single step may pass over thousands of years. Beneath your feet, ancient mud has hardened into memory. Minerals have rearranged themselves into permanence. And yet the feeling is not heavy, it is calm. The emotional journey here is not one of loss alone, but of recognition. The realization that absence does not mean erasure, that silence can be full, that what no longer falls from the sky may still live beneath the ground, held in trust. Marked by the moon, the stones seem to glow faintly, as if remembering touch. They hold the shape of waves, the trace of currents, the echo of rain striking water, then water striking earth. If you listen closely, very closely, the wind passing over them almost sounds like rainfall. Almost. Some believe that stones dream, that when night cools the land and the stars press closer, memories loosen their hold and drift upward. The stones do not release these memories easily. They do not offer them to the hurried or the loud. They wait for stillness. Beneath the silence, the hush of water settling into earth remains. In other ages, travelers may have rested beside these lakes, watching reflections ripple and fade. Animals drank here. Plants rooted themselves in damp soil, trusting the return of rain. The stones watched all of it, without judgment, without attachment. They still do. As climates shifted and rains wandered elsewhere, the stones adjusted. They dried slowly. Cracks formed like gentle signatures of change. Salt crept outward as water withdrew, leaving behind pale offerings. Nothing shattered, nothing screamed. The change was thoughtful, and so the myths changed too. Flood stories became distant echoes, sky gods grew quiet, promises transformed into symbols. Yet the stones remained, holding the memory without demand. They did not ask for belief, they did not insist on remembrance, they simply endured. Where memory fades, stone remains. The night deepens now, the air cools, breath becomes visible for a moment, then disappears. The stars continue their slow procession, indifferent yet familiar. In their light, the stones look less like relics and more like companions. You are not standing above them, you are resting beside them. This is the acceptance the chapter moves toward, not resignation, but peace. The understanding that cycles unfold beyond urgency, that rain may return or may not. That memory does not require repetition to be sacred. Perhaps the stones know something we have forgotten, that holding is enough. As the wind settles, the stones fall silent again, not because they have finished speaking, but because their story does not need an ending. They will remain here long after our listening softens, long after sleep takes hold. They will continue to remember rain, and you, resting in the cool night air, may feel something loosen, a quiet trust, a gentle release. The land does not rush, neither must you. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was always meant to be felt. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as the stars dim slightly and the night deepens its hold, the stones keep their memories close, patient and whole, while the world drifts softly toward sleep. It is said that some rivers do not disappear. They learn how to hide in forgotten corners of the earth where dawn arrives without sound and the desert exhales its cool breath into the early light. A dry channel winds through the sand like a sentence interrupted. It curves gently, then sharply, then disappears beneath dunes that have learned to move. No water reflects the sky here. No reeds whisper. Only the shape remains, a scar, a memory, a path once spoken aloud. This is the invitation. A riverbed without a river, a name erased by time. Once, long before silence learned this place, a great river crossed the desert. It moved steadily, confidently, carving its way through stone and soil as if following a promise made before words. Forests leaned toward its banks, villages gathered along its edges, life arranged itself around its patience. Now, the river's name has dissolved. It is not written on modern maps. It lingers only in fragments, whispered by elders, traced faintly by shadow, suggested by the slow bending of the land. Some call it ancient, some call it lost, some believe it never truly vanished, only withdrew its voice. Whispers tell us that rivers remember even when we forget. The story follows this invisible course, not by sight alone, but by suggestion. From high above, satellites trace dark lines beneath the sand, subtle differences in color and texture, like veins beneath skin. These shadows reveal what the eye cannot: the ghost of flow, the suggestion of movement where none now exists. From the ground, memory takes another form. Oral histories speak softly of a waterway that once fed fields and animals, of journeys guided by its bends, of stars reflected in its surface. These stories do not align perfectly. Dates shift, names blur, yet the river's presence remains undeniable, held together by feeling rather than certainty. Between maps and myths, the river rests. It is said that civilizations rise where water lingers. Along this forgotten channel, traces of human life still surface: stone tools, fragments of pottery, hearths reduced to ash and outline. These are not ruins of grandeur but of continuity, evidence of people who lived with water as companion rather than conquest, who understood that a river is not owned, only shared. Beneath the silence, the land remembers their footsteps. Trees once rooted themselves here, drawing life upward from the river's steady breath. Animals followed predictable paths, trusting the water's return. Children learned the sound of current before the sound of dust. Belief itself shaped around flow, rituals timed to flood, stories told of renewal rather than survival. Then slowly, the river began to change, not with catastrophe, not with warning, but with hesitation. Season by season, the water thinned. Floods arrived less often, the channel grew quieter. People adjusted their lives, moving camps, altering routes, trusting the river to return as it always had. But absence, when prolonged, becomes instruction. The river withdrew further, retreating into memory, into ground, into silence. Its name, once spoken daily, became ceremonial, then symbolic, then unnecessary. Maps recorded new paths. Myths shifted their focus. What was once central became peripheral, and still the channel remained. Marked by the moon, the dry riverbed glows faintly at night. Its curves catch silver light, revealing a geometry too intentional to be accidental. The land has not erased it. It has preserved its outline, as if unwilling to forget entirely. Some believe the river chose sleep, that it sank beneath the sand to protect itself from misuse, from noise, from forgetting, that it waits, listening, patient as stone, until the world remembers how to receive rather than demand. Others speak of climate, of shifting winds and distant rains, of monsoons that change their routes. They describe the river as a consequence rather than a decision. Yet even these explanations carry reverence. They acknowledge the river's role, its influence, its long presence. Science and story meet here, not in conflict, but in quiet agreement. Both admit the river was real. Both admit it mattered. Where the river once flowed, belief transformed. Without water to gather around, people carried their rituals inward. Sacred sites moved from banks to memory. Stories of abundance became stories of endurance. The river's absence reshaped not only the land, but the way people understood the world. Loss became teacher. The tone here is mournful but calm, not the grief of sudden ending, but the melancholy of gradual departure, like watching someone walk away without turning back, trusting that the distance itself has meaning. The river does not feel angry, it feels deliberate. At certain bends, where the channel deepens slightly, the air feels different, cooler, heavier, as if something lingers just below the surface. If you stand still long enough, the wind passing through the curve carries a low sound, not quite water, not quite silence, an echo. Beneath the silence, layers of meaning gather. The river teaches that presence is not permanent. That nourishment leaves marks even after it departs. That absence can be as formative as abundance. Maps disagree here. Some ancient charts mark a river where none flows now, others omit it entirely. Modern instruments trace possibilities rather than certainty. And yet, standing beside the empty bend, the truth feels less disputed. You can feel where water once insisted. The channel curves inward, then opens slightly as if pausing. This is where the chapter closes, not at a mouth, not at a source, but at a bend, an unfinished thought in the land's long sentence. Here, the river's silence feels intentional, not an ending, a pause. Perhaps the river did not lose its name. Perhaps it released it. Names bind, names fix, and the river, always moving, may have chosen freedom over record. It flows now in other ways, through soil, through memory, through the subtle guidance of life that still aligns itself with its unseen path. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. As night deepens, the desert cools. Stars gather overhead, reflected only in imagination. The empty channel darkens, becoming less distinct, blending into the surrounding sand. Yet its presence does not fade. It rests. And as you rest beside it, breath slow, attention soft, the river continues its quiet work, holding what it has been, waiting without urgency, trusting that remembrance does not require return. Where memory fades, silence remains, and within that silence the river still flows, unspoken, unnamed, and whole. Perhaps it was never meant to be found again. Perhaps it was always meant to be followed inward. The bend holds its breath. The night listens. And sleep arrives like water without needing a name. It is said that the sky has its own memory, not the kind we keep in names and dates, not the kind that lives in books or spoken stories, but a memory made of motion, of wind that returns to familiar paths, of clouds that gather where they once felt welcome, of rain that hesitates at the edge of a land it no longer recognizes. In forgotten corners of the earth, there are evenings when the Sahara looks upward as if listening. The dunes hold their pale warmth like a slow heartbeat. The horizon stretches wide and unguarded, and above it all, the sky moves with an unhurried grace, as though it is searching for something it has lost. This is the invitation. A slow-moving sky, clouds gathering over a land that no longer calls them. They arrive gently, these clouds, soft as breath, layered like veils. They do not bring thunder. They do not arrive like conquerors. They simply drift in, drawn by currents older than our remembering. And for a moment, the desert seems less certain of itself. The air cools, the light changes, shadows deepen in the folds of sand. Some believe that weather is a sacred language, that the earth speaks upward and the sky answers, sometimes with rain, sometimes with silence, sometimes with a lingering uncertainty that feels like longing. Long ago, when the Sahara still wore green, the sky answered often. It is said that monsoon winds once traveled farther north, carrying moisture like a gift carried in open hands. They came from oceanic distances, gathering warmth and water over blue horizons, then rising, moving inland, climbing into the continent with patient determination. They brought clouds to places now defined by dust. Grasslands waited beneath them. Lakes opened their still eyes, rivers braided across the land like shimmering threads, and the sky, full, heavy, generous, breathed. Whispers tell us there were seasons when the heavens grew thick with rain-heavy clouds, and the desert listened not for wind, but for water. The first drops would fall softly, almost shyly, darkening the earth in small circles. Then more would follow, and the scent of wet soil would rise like incense. In those days, the land did not brace itself, it welcomed. Somewhere among rocky outcrops and sheltered cliffs, rock art remains, a doorway carved into time. In the moon's pale light or the slanting hush of dawn, these painted walls reveal boats, fish, and communal rituals beneath a sky that seems alive with promise. Figures stand with arms raised as if greeting the clouds. Herds move across painted plains. Swimmers stretch forward, suspended in stone as though water is still present, still holding them. The images are not loud, they do not demand attention, but they carry a quiet power, like a prayer left unfinished. Beneath the silence, the rock remembers rain. It remembers the sound of drops striking leaves. It remembers puddles forming in hollows of stone. It remembers laughter softened by wet air. And so this chapter moves like a slow ceremony, treating weather not as background, but as sacred presence. Because weather shapes more than landscapes, it shapes belief. When clouds come regularly, trust forms. People plant, gather, settle. They align their lives with rhythms of sky and soil. They build stories around return, around the idea that what leaves will come back. In a greener Sahara, communities once lived with this kind of trust. They gathered near lakes that reflected celestial patterns. They followed rivers that carried life through grasslands. They watched clouds build in the distance like slow-moving mountains, knowing that water was on its way. It is said that the first thunder was not feared, it was honored. The sky was not separate from the earth. It was part of the same breath. And yet, as the ages turned, the breath began to change. Not sharply, not cruelly, but subtly, like a song fading at the edge of hearing. Monsoon winds shifted, their roots altered as the planet's rhythms changed. Tilt, orbit, distant patterns of heat and cold. The winds still carried moisture, but they no longer traveled as far. The clouds still gathered, but their gatherings grew hesitant. Rain still fell, but less often, less deeply, less faithfully. The Sahara began to lose its clouds, not in one dramatic moment, but in a slow unthreading. The emotional currents here shift from awe to tenderness, because the fading of abundance is not always violent. Sometimes it is quiet, sometimes it is patient. Sometimes it happens so gradually that those living through it cannot point to a single day and say, this is when it changed. They only know that the sky feels different. Some believe the land tried to call the clouds back. That as lakes shrank and grasses thinned, the earth sent its heat upward, reaching for the sky like an open palm. But the winds had already begun to wander. The clouds, once faithful travelers, were now uncertain guests. Beneath the silence, a new rhythm formed. People adapted, as people always do. Camps shifted closer to remaining water. Routes changed. Rituals evolved. Stories transformed from songs of return into songs of endurance. The rock art, too, became more precious, not just images of life, but reminders of what had been. A doorway, preserved in stone, leading back into rain. Science and myth meet here in gentle contradiction. One speaks of paleoclimate, of humid periods and arid cycles, of monsoon dynamics and orbital patterns. The other speaks of sky gods and blessings withheld, of paradise drifting away, of clouds that once belonged here but were called elsewhere. Yet both agree on the essential truth. The Sahara once breathed with clouds. And even now, in rare seasons when moisture returns, when storms cross the desert and rain falls briefly on sand, something ancient seems to stir. The smell of wet earth rises again, the dunes darken, the air softens. For a moment the desert feels like it is remembering itself. It is said that rain awakens sleeping stories. Some travelers have stood beneath these sudden desert storms and felt something like reverence. Not because rain is rare, but because it feels like a visitation, like an old friend returning without warning, staying only long enough to prove that memory still lives. The sky in these moments feels almost apologetic, as if it knows it has been away too long. Marked by the moon, puddles form in shallow basins, reflecting starlight the way ancient lakes once did. They shimmer briefly, then vanish, leaving behind darkened sand and a hush deeper than before. And yet, even this brief return carries meaning. It reminds us that the desert is not a static thing. It is a phase, a posture, a slow gesture in the earth's long ritual. It has been green, it has been wet, it has been full of life that moved beneath cloud shadow, and it may be again in some distant turning of the cycle, where memory fades, the sky still remembers. This is the final reflection the chapter offers. Clouds drifting away, leaving behind not only emptiness, but a sense of longing. The clouds do not depart with anger, they do not rush, they move slowly, dissolving into the pale distance as if reluctant to leave. The sky grows clear again, stars return, sharp and countless. The desert cools. Wind resumes its quiet chant across sand. And yet, if you look closely, you may feel that the sky is still holding a faint imprint of those clouds, like a handprint on glass, like a breath on a mirror. Perhaps the sky still remembers where it once belonged. Perhaps it remembers the way the Sahara looked beneath rain-heavy heavens, green, open, alive with movement. Perhaps it remembers the sound of water striking stone, the shimmer of lakes under celestial light, the communal rituals painted on rock walls as offerings to the clouds. Or perhaps the memory is not in the sky at all. Perhaps it is in us, listening. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep approaches, the last image is gentle, clouds thinning into nothing, a vast desert resting beneath a star-marked canopy, the air calm, the world quiet. The Sahara lies as it is now, ancient, veiled, patient, while somewhere far away over distant oceans the monsoon winds gather moisture again. The cycle continues. The sky inhales, the desert waits. And in that waiting, in that sacred pause between rain and dust, between abundance and stillness, the world drifts softly toward dream, held by the quiet thought that even what is gone can still be remembered. Perhaps it was never meant to stay. Perhaps it was always meant to return, someday, in another breath of the earth. It is said that some waters never leave. They only change the way they are seen. In forgotten corners of the earth, night arrives like a veil drawn slowly over the shoulders of the land. The desert cools. The wind softens into a hush. And above, the sky opens, wide, star-marked, ancient, spilling constellations across the darkness, as if scattering bright seeds into an endless field. But there is a place, whispered of in stone and silence, where the stars once had a second home. Long ago, before dunes rose like frozen waves and dust became the desert's dominant prayer, an immense lake lay here, so vast its edges felt like distant horizons. At night, its surface held the sky in perfect stillness. Starlight trembled on water. Constellations leaned down and looked back at themselves. Now, where water once rested, only dust lies. This is the invitation. A nocturnal scene of absence that feels almost impossible, an empty basin under a jeweled sky, as if the earth has been hollowed and left to listen. Moonlight falls gently onto pale salt flats and ancient shorelines, revealing curves that once cradled waves. The ground is cracked in places, soft in others, and every step seems to stir a fine powder that rises and settles like breath. Some believe that if you stand very still here, you can hear the lake, not with your ears, perhaps, but with a quieter sense, an inner listening. The air feels different above this basin, as if it holds the faint imprint of moisture. The night carries a coolness that does not fully belong to sand. The horizon seems too open, too round, as if it remembers water spreading outward. It is said that the lake was a mirror, not merely a body of water, but a sacred reflection of the heavens. A place where the sky could see itself, and where those who lived nearby could look down and feel the cosmos looking back. Whispers tell us that people gathered at its edges in older ages, before written names, before recorded time. They watched stars spill across the lake's surface, and they believed the water was a doorway, that the world above and the world below were connected by reflection. In such beliefs, the lake was not separate from spirit. It was spirit made visible. Yet beneath the silence, geology speaks too, quietly, patiently, without hurry. It tells of humid eras, of rains that returned like pilgrims, of monsoon winds traveling farther north than they do now. It tells of basins filling, of rivers feeding the lake, of water lingering long enough to leave behind layers of sediment like pages pressed into stone. Science does not deny the lake's sacredness, it simply names it differently. It describes ancient shorelines etched into rock like rings on a tree, marking where the water once stood. Higher, lower, higher again. It points to shells turned to stone, to pollen trapped in layers of mud, to salt deposits that shimmer under moonlight like crystallized memory. And in that shimmering myth and evidence intertwine. Some believe the lake's surface reflected not just stars, but time. That when you looked into it, you did not see only constellations. You saw the past, the future, the deep spiral of existence unfolding. The lake, in this telling, was a celestial mirror, a sacred eye. It watched quietly, and like all mirrors, it held what appeared before it without judgment. The exploration of this chapter moves slowly, in circles, like ripples widening across water that is no longer here. We return again and again to the same image, starlight trembling on a surface now buried. We walk the lake's vanished edges, tracing its outline by the way the land dips and rises, by the pale bands of salt that mark former waves. Marked by the moon, the basin feels like a vast bowl turned upward. It gathers not rain now, but starlight. It gathers shadow. It gathers the feeling of something missing that still shapes everything around it. In the center of this ancient lakebed, the silence is different. It is not empty silence. It is layered, veiled, as if holding a long breath. The wind moves gently, stirring dust in slow spirals that rise and fall like faint ghosts of waves. Some believe those spirals are the lake dreaming, that the lake, even in absence, continues its ritual, circling, settling, rising, settling again, a motion without water, but not without meaning. In forgotten corners of the earth, absence often becomes a kind of presence. This lake's absence has weight. It shaped where people lived, where animals migrated, where plants rooted themselves and flourished. It shaped stories and rituals, guiding human imagination toward the sky. When water was here, life gathered. When water began to withdraw, life followed it, leaving behind traces of movement rather than ruins. The lake did not leave in one dramatic moment. It receded. Perhaps its retreat was slow enough to seem natural, like an exhale after a long inhale. Perhaps those living through it did not call it loss. Perhaps they called it change, or destiny, or the turning of a sacred cycle. Whispers tell us that cycles older than language govern this land. Rains return, then fade. Grasslands rise, then fall asleep. Lakes appear, then become dust. The earth does not mourn the way humans do. It transforms, it remembers, it waits. And so, the lake became something else, an imprint rather than a presence. Emotion settles into quiet wonder at this transformation, wonder at the scale of time, wonder at the patience of the land, wonder at how something so immense could vanish, and yet leave such clear signs that it once existed. Then gently, a soft ache arrives. Not sharp, not urgent, but tender. The ache is for the lost reflections, for the nights when stars had two skies, one above, one below, for the moments when a person could sit at the lake's edge and feel suspended between worlds, for the way water holds light and makes it feel nearer, softer, more intimate. Now the stars are only overhead. They remain beautiful, countless, shimmering like ancient dust. But something has changed. Without the lake, the sky feels farther away. The constellations are no longer mirrored. The celestial has lost its twin. Some believe this is why humans invented stories, to restore what the world withdraws, to create mirrors in language when water is gone. And so, even now, people speak of the lake beneath the stars. They speak of prehistoric seas and inland waters. They speak of vanished shorelines and the soft, improbable truth that deserts can remember rain. They speak of starlight trembling where dust now lies. Beneath the silence, the lake remains a spiritual mirror, not because it reflects anymore, but because it reflects inward. It asks the listener to consider what is real, what is remembered, and what is imagined. Because sometimes imagination is not escape, sometimes it is return. As the night deepens, the basin grows colder, the salt flats pale under moonlight, looking like frozen water, as if the lake is pretending just for a moment. The wind slows, the desert settles. Far away, dunes rise like sleeping beasts, their backs marked by silver edges. Here, in this sacred hollow, one can almost see the water again, not with eyes, but with a softer sense. A memory borrowed from stone, a dream lent by time. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And in this place the echo is gentle, the idea that the lake is not gone, only changed. That beneath centuries of sand, beneath layers of dust and salt and silence, the basin holds its shape. It holds the memory of weight, it holds the outline of waves, it rests. Perhaps it was never meant to be found again in full. Perhaps it was meant to remain half-hidden, veiled, like sacred knowledge that reveals itself only through quiet attention. The chapter ends with stars reflected only in imagination. The sky continues its slow turning, ancient and indifferent and beautiful. The desert holds still beneath it, cradling the sleeping basin. And somewhere, in the hush between breath and sleep, the listener may feel the lake return, not as water but as presence, a mirror beneath the mind's eye. Starlight trembles, and the lake, beneath centuries of sand, continues to rest, holding its reflections without demand, waiting in silence for those who will remember to look. It is said that the earth remembers touch. In forgotten corners of the world, where the night settles gently and the wind moves with care, there are places where the ground still holds the shape of human presence, not names, not faces, but footsteps, pressed once into wet earth thousands of years ago, when rain was expected and soil was soft enough to receive. They remain now as stone, hardened impressions, shallow and precise, leading across what was once a living surface. A garden without walls, a place where water moved slowly and people moved with it. This is the invitation. A moment when the past does not feel distant, but close enough to breathe beside you. A moment when the earth opens itself and says, quietly, someone was here. The footprints do not hurry. They are spaced with ease, suggesting no flight, no panic. To follow them with the eyes is to feel the rhythm of walking without urgency. Heel, toe, pause, step again. They cross ancient ground that was once damp, once fertile, once alive with grasses and the murmur of water moving just below the surface. Some believe these prints were left after rain, when the land was generous. Others believe they mark a path taken daily, familiar enough to be walked without thought. Either way, the earth accepted them, held them, and over time transformed them into memory. Stone is only earth that has learned patience. This chapter follows those footsteps, not to a destination, but into a way of living now unreachable. It follows early communities who lived with water not as a resource to be seized, but as a companion to be listened to. Water was not conquered here. It was greeted. Beneath the silence, the land remembers how. Lakes rested nearby, their edges shifting gently with seasons. Rivers did not roar, they murmured. They curved through the land like thoughtful sentences, feeding soil, inviting growth. People built their lives around this movement, not imposing order but aligning with it. They rose with light. They gathered when the air softened. They read the sky not for warning but for reassurance. Clouds were not threats. They were signs of continuity. It is said that daily rituals once unfolded here with quiet grace, hands dipped into water at dawn, feet pressed into mud along familiar paths. Fires were lit not in haste, but with intention. Food was prepared slowly. Stories were shared not to pass time, but to weave it together. The tone of this life was intimate, almost whispered. And yet, when we look back from our distance, contradictions arise. We are taught to imagine early humanity as surviving, always struggling, always at the edge of loss. But the earth tells another story. The footprints tell another story. They suggest leisure. They suggest pauses taken without fear. They suggest moments set aside for art, for ceremony, for beauty that does not immediately serve survival. Nearby, rock walls carry images, animals rendered with care, human figures painted mid-gesture, scenes of movement that feel celebratory rather than desperate. These are not marks of panic, they are marks of belonging. Whispers tell us that people once gathered here not only to eat and sleep, but to witness, to honor cycles, to stand beneath the sky and recognize themselves as part of something vast and alive. Ceremonies may have followed the return of rain. Songs may have been offered to the land not as payment, but as gratitude. Children may have learned paths by walking them barefoot, their feet sinking gently into earth that did not resist. The footprints remain as proof of this gentler truth. Marked by the moon, they catch faint light at night, their edges softened by time but still distinct. Each one is slightly different, some deeper, some lighter, suggesting different bodies, different weights, different moments, a community in motion. And yet, the garden vanished, not suddenly, not violently, but slowly, as gardens often do when left to rest. Rains became less reliable, water lingered for shorter seasons, the soil dried, then cracked, grasses thinned, paths hardened. The footprints, once ephemeral, became fixed, held by the earth as if in farewell. People adapted, as they always have. They followed water elsewhere. They carried their rituals forward, adjusting them to new landscapes. The garden was not abandoned in grief, but in understanding. Absence taught them how to move. The emotional arc of this chapter moves toward reverence, not for what was lost, but for what was never owned. Humanity here is not cast as ruler or victim, but as caretaker, temporary, attentive, a guest who knew when to leave. This recognition carries weight. To see ourselves as transient is not to diminish our importance, but to soften it. To understand that the land does not exist for us alone, and that our presence, no matter how meaningful, is always part of a longer story. Beneath the silence, the garden continues, not as water and grass, but as memory embedded in stone. The footprints do not decay. They do not demand interpretation. They simply remain, quiet witnesses to a way of being that balanced need with respect. Some believe the footprints are a message, not written in words but in form. They say, walk gently. They say, notice where you place your weight. They say, the earth remembers. As night deepens, the air cools around these ancient impressions. The stars emerge, star-marked and steady, looking down upon the same paths they once guided. The sky has changed, the land has changed, but the relationship endures. Footsteps still lead across the earth, ours now layered over theirs, but few leave marks that last. Perhaps that is the lesson the garden offers. That presence need not be permanent to be meaningful. That care can be brief and still sacred, that what we touch lightly may endure longer than what we grasp. Where memory fades, stone remains. The chapter closes in silence. The footsteps lead onward, but to no single place. They curve, scatter, overlap, and disappear into hardened ground. They lead nowhere and everywhere at once, into the past, into the idea of home, into the quiet understanding that we are all passing through. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And here, in this vanished garden, the echo is soft, a reminder that we belong not by ownership, but by relationship. That the earth does not ask us to stay forever, only to walk with awareness while we are here. Perhaps it was never meant to be preserved in full. Perhaps it was always meant to fade, leaving only impressions for those who come later. The night settles deeper. The footprints rest. The garden sleeps, not gone, but transformed. And as your own breath slows, as sleep approaches, the path opens inward. You follow it not with your feet, but with your attention, stepping gently into the quiet space where memory, earth, and dream meet, leading you onward, softly, into rest. It is said that before there were calendars, before there were borders or names for eras, the earth kept time in another way, not with numbers, not with lines drawn across stone, but with rhythm. In forgotten corners of the world, where the desert meets the memory of water, a question drifts in like a breath carried on evening wind. Can climate have a heartbeat? This is the invitation. A question without urgency, without demand for answer. A question meant not to be solved, but felt. As night lowers itself gently across the land, the air cools, and the sky deepens, and the earth seems to pause, listening inward, as if keeping time with something older than sound. Long before humans learned to measure years, the planet was already moving in cycles, slow, patient, deliberate. Like the sea responding to the moon, the climate advanced and retreated, not in anger, not in haste, but in obedience to a rhythm written into the fabric of the world. Some believe this rhythm still pulses beneath our feet. Beneath the silence, the land remembers how to breathe. There were ages when rain returned often, when winds traveled predictable paths, when clouds gathered as if guided by unseen hands. The Sahara bloomed, lakes filled, rivers braided themselves across open plains. Life unfolded outward, trusting the steady return of water. Then, just as gently, the tide shifted. Not suddenly, not violently. The climate did not break. It turned. Winds altered their courses. Rains hesitated. Seasons stretched, then thinned. What had once been familiar grew uncertain, then rare. The land adjusted, as it always has. Sacred language has long tried to name this movement. Ancient peoples spoke of sky spirits who came and went, of rain-bringers who followed distant laws, of earth beings who slept and woke in cycles too vast for any one generation to witness fully. Science speaks differently, yet with equal reverence. It tells of orbital dances and axial tilts, of oceans warming and cooling, of ice advancing and retreating like breath drawn in and let out. It speaks of feedbacks and balances, of thresholds crossed so slowly they feel eternal. Myth and measurement do not disagree here. They circle the same truth. Climate moves like a tide. It arrives, it recedes, it returns, changed but familiar. The narrative of this chapter flows in circles, revisiting the same ideas again and again, each time with softer edges. Wind is no longer a force to fear, but a messenger. Rain is not a threat, but a visitor. Drought is not punishment, but pause. Even absence has its place in the rhythm. Marked by the moon, ancient shorelines still curve across the land, tracing where water once rested. Fossilized pollen sleeps in stone, proof of forests that breathed here long ago. Salt flats shimmer like quiet seas, reflecting stars as if practicing remembrance. These are not signs of disaster, they are signatures of movement. Emotion settles into an even, lulling tone, neither grief nor celebration, but acceptance. The understanding that permanence is not promised, and that this is not cruelty, but design. Some believe the earth learned patience before it learned form, that it has always known how to wait. Human stories often struggle with impermanence. We seek stability, continuity, return, but the land teaches another way. It shows us that change does not erase meaning. It reshapes it. Where forests once stood, desert rests. Where water once shimmered, dust now listens. Where life gathered densely, space has opened wide, and yet nothing here is empty. Beneath the silence, the rhythm continues. The wind still moves, the sun still rises and sets, the stars still trace their ancient paths. Deep below, the earth shifts slowly, carrying forward the memory of rain, of green, of abundance that once felt endless. It is said that climates do not forget. They pause, and in that pause, life adapts. Animals migrate, plants retreat or endure, humans follow water, adjust belief, rewrite stories. Civilizations rise where conditions allow, then fade or move when the tide turns. This is not failure, it is participation. To live on Earth is to live inside a cycle. Sacred traditions across cultures have understood this intuitively. Flood myths appear again and again, not as warnings alone, but as acknowledgements of return. Stories of golden ages and lost paradises echo a deep memory of times when the land felt generous, when climate aligned with human need. These stories are not nostalgia, they are recognition. Recognition that the world has changed before, recognition that it will change again. And still, the rhythm holds. As night deepens, the desert cools. Heat, released slowly into darkness, feels like the earth exhaling. The stars seem sharper now, closer, as if leaning in to listen along with us. Somewhere far away, oceans rise and fall, tides answering the moon without hesitation. The climate does not rush. It never has. Perhaps this is the comfort hidden in its movement. That change unfolds slowly enough to be lived with, even if not fully understood. That impermanence does not arrive as chaos, but as a gradual turning, giving time to adjust, to adapt, to remember. The final reflection of this chapter does not seek certainty. Instead, it invites listening. Listening for the tide's return, not necessarily of water, but of balance. Listening for the subtle signals of shift and rest. Listening for the earth's quiet reassurance that nothing essential is lost, only transformed. Will the green return to the desert? Will rains travel north again? Will lakes refill their ancient bowls? Perhaps, perhaps not in any time we can name, but the memory remains, and memory, held gently, is its own form of presence. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. As sleep approaches, the question softens. The idea of a climate with a heartbeat no longer feels abstract. It feels intimate. It feels like a slow pulse beneath the surface of everything, steady, patient, enduring. The tide has gone out. The shore waits, not in longing, but in trust. The land rests beneath a star-marked sky, ancient and veiled, carrying forward the knowledge that nothing stands still forever, and that this too is sacred. Where memory fades, rhythm remains. And somewhere beyond the edge of our waking thoughts, the climate continues its slow, deliberate movement, advancing, retreating, breathing, while we drift gently into rest, comforted by the quiet truth that the tide has always returned before, and that the earth knows how to wait. It is said that some maps are not made of ink. In forgotten corners of the earth, where night arrives like a slow veil and the horizon seems to widen as the world grows quiet, there are travelers who carry no paper, no parchment, no stamped seal of certainty. They walk with their eyes half lifted to the stars and their ears tuned to the hush of wind. They read the land the way one reads a face, by subtle lines, by familiar shadows, by the feeling of direction in the body itself. And sometimes, when the fire is small and the lantern light is low, a map appears, not on a table, not in a book, but in dust. This is the invitation. A circle of sand smoothed with the palm, lit by a trembling flame. a finger dragging slow lines across the surface, shaping rivers that no longer flow, marking waterholes now erased, tracing paths that once belonged to a greener Sahara. The map is drawn, then redrawn, then softened by wind. It is a ritual as much as a guide, an act of remembrance. Some believe that the oldest maps were sung, that roots were carried in breath and rhythm, passed from elder to youth in the quiet cadence of story. Not because paper was scarce, but because the land itself was always changing, and a living map must be able to change with it. Whispers tell us that the desert does not allow certainty for long. Long before the Sahara became the vast silence many imagine today, it wore other faces. Grasslands opened beneath wide clouds, lakes rested in basins like dark mirrors, seasonal rivers braided through lowlands, and the air carried a softness, a moisture, an ease. In those ages, travel was not a battle against emptiness. It was a slow crossing through open life. Caravans moved as they always have, patient, steady, aligned with the rhythm of day and night. The camel's footsteps fell into sand like quiet drumbeats. Packs creaked softly, cloth flapped in the wind like prayer flags, and in the hush between words, the travelers listened. They listened for water, they listened for wind, they listened for the shape of the stars. Marked by the moon, the desert offered guidance in subtle ways, a line of darker ground where moisture once lingered, a cluster of stones arranged long ago as a signpost, a lone acacia clinging to a hidden seam of life beneath the surface, and above, always above, the star-marked canopy, steady and ancient. Some believe the stars were the first compass, that certain constellations were not just patterns, but promises. The rising of one meant it was time to turn east. The settling of another meant a waterhole should be near. Names were given to these lights, names that sounded like breath and belonged to no single language. Yet even stars shift, slowly, over centuries. Even the sky is not fixed forever, and so the map drawn in dust was never only celestial. It was also intimate, learned through the soles of feet and the timing of thirst. It was held in the body, an inner knowing of distance, of direction, of when to pause. In lantern light, the map becomes a small universe. A finger presses into dust and makes a circle, a lake, once wide enough to reflect constellations. Another line curves beside it, a river path, now a dry channel winding through sand like a forgotten sentence. A dot is placed between two dunes, a well known only to those who remember its taste. The storyteller's voice is soft. It is said, they murmur, that if you follow this line of stones, you will find water where the land still holds its breath. And the listeners lean closer because the desert teaches that direction is sacred. But here, contradictions gather like shadows at the edge of firelight. Some maps exist in archives, ancient charts with coastlines drawn too far inland, with seas marked where now there is only dust. Some speak of rivers crossing the Sahara, of fertile corridors, of places described with certainty that modern eyes cannot find. Are these errors, exaggerations, misreadings, or are they fragments of a truth that has changed its shape? Whispers tell us the land can rewrite itself, a waterhole can vanish under shifting sand, a path can be erased by one season of wind, a green valley can dry over generations until it becomes a hollow of stone. The map, once accurate, becomes myth, the route, once familiar, becomes legend, the traveler's certainty becomes nostalgia, and yet the stories persist. Because even when a path is no longer passable, it remains real in memory. The tone of this chapter is hushed, filled with slow caravan movement and the warm glow of lanterns against the immense night. We walk not quickly, but steadily, feeling the rhythm of travel as a kind of meditation. The desert around us is vast, but our attention stays close, on small signs, on quiet patterns, on the way the wind changes when the ground beneath shifts from sand to ancient clay. Beneath the silence, traces remain. Faint lines in the earth that once held water, fossilized shells where a lake once lapped at its edges, rock art on sheltered walls depicting boats and fish, as if insisting this was once true. The desert does not argue. It simply holds these offerings and waits for someone patient enough to notice them. Some believe the Sahara is a library without shelves. Its books are not bound in leather, but layered in stone and dust. Its chapters are written in shorelines and salt flats, in the curve of dry riverbeds, in the placement of stars above. To navigate it is to read it, and reading, like traveling, requires humility. Because the map drawn in dust is always temporary, it belongs to the moment it is made. A gust of wind can blur its lines, a careless sleeve can wipe away its symbols. Even the storyteller's memory can soften, shifting details as years pass. The map is fragile, and that fragility is part of its truth. Direction itself can vanish. Emotion drifts toward nostalgia here, not the sharp ache of longing, but the soft sadness of knowing something once existed with clarity and now exists only in echo. The caravan's imagined route carries us through a Sahara that once offered more frequent water, more predictable shade, more signs of life. We glimpse grasslands in the mind's eye, see distant herds moving under wide clouds, hear the faint laughter of a camp beside a shallow lake. Then the image fades. We return to the present desert, silent, veiled, immense. And yet, the nostalgia is not empty. It carries reverence. Because those who traveled before us did not rely on permanence. They relied on relationship, with stars, with wind, with hidden wells, with one another. Their maps were not declarations of control. They were acts of listening. It is said that to draw a map in dust is to admit you do not own the land. You only pass through it. The chapter deepens by returning again and again to the same lantern-lit scene, hands tracing routes, voices describing distant landmarks, eyes looking upward to confirm the story with the sky. Each return feels slightly different, as if the map itself is changing even in the telling. A dot becomes a question, a line becomes a possibility, a lake becomes a memory. Some believe that the most sacred knowledge is the kind that cannot be held too tightly, because what can be held too tightly becomes rigid, and rigidity breaks when the world shifts. The desert shifts constantly. Sand moves like water in slow motion. Dunes travel, paths vanish and appear. Even the stars that guide us glide imperceptibly over centuries. To navigate such a world, one must learn to accept uncertainty as companion. This is the quiet wisdom beneath the chapter. Not fear, not drama, but gentle acceptance. As the night grows deeper, the caravan slows, the lantern burns lower, the storyteller's finger rests on the dust map one last time. The lines are clear now, but only for a moment. The air is cool, and the sky is heavy with stars that feel close enough to touch. Then the wind stirs. It begins softly, almost kindly, just enough to lift a thin veil of dust. The map's edges blur. A riverline becomes faint. The dot marking the well softens. The lake circle fades into the surrounding sand as if it never existed. No one rushes to fix it. No one cries out. They watch quietly as the map dissolves. Because perhaps this is part of the ritual too. To let the map vanish is to acknowledge what the desert has always taught, that guidance is not a permanent object. It is a living act. It must be renewed with attention, with patience, with the willingness to be uncertain. Where memory fades, the land remains. The chapter closes with only dust and starlight. The caravan rests, the lantern is extinguished, the stars continue their silent turning overhead, ancient and star-marked. The desert, vast and veiled, holds its breath as if listening for footsteps that once knew every bend and waterhole. Perhaps those paths are gone, perhaps they are simply buried, waiting. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and as sleep approaches, the final feeling is gentle, a sense that direction itself can vanish, and yet something deeper still guides us. Rhythm, attention, the slow turning of the sky, the quiet trust that even without a map, the world can carry us. Perhaps it was never meant to be held. Perhaps it was always meant to be drawn, and then released. The dust settles, the stars remain, and the mind, like the desert, drifts softly into silence, following a path that cannot be seen, but somehow feels known. It is said that the truest storm is not always the one that breaks the sky. In forgotten corners of the earth, there are nights when clouds gather at the edge of the horizon and do not cross. When the wind shifts as if it is preparing to sing, and then falls quiet again. When the air tastes almost like water, almost, and the land lifts its face upward, waiting for something it has known before. This chapter opens in that hour, after a storm that never arrives. The sky is heavy, veiled and dim with promise. A low darkness moves across the distance like a curtain being drawn. Somewhere far away, lightning might have flashed, thunder might have rolled. But here, above the ancient desert, nothing falls. The clouds thin, then drift apart, leaving the stars exposed again, bright, star-marked, unblinking, and the land remains dry. This is the invitation. Not the sound of rainfall, but the absence of it, not the relief of water, but the quiet aftermath of a hope that dissolves. The desert lies beneath the open sky, vast and still, as though holding its breath, not in panic but in patience. Some believe the desert has learned to wait in ways we cannot. Beneath the silence there is an echo. You may not hear it at first. The wind is too soft, the night too calm. But if you settle into stillness, if you allow your thoughts to slow like a candle flame steadying, you begin to sense it. A faint memory woven into the air, a rhythm the land carries in secret, the echo of rain. Once, this place was not only sand and distance. Once, it held water in many forms, an oceanic presence sleeping beneath dunes, rivers that moved like living sentences, lakes that mirrored constellations, gardens where human footsteps pressed into wet earth and were gently received. Tonight, all of those fragments return, not as images that demand attention, but as soft impressions, like dreams that drift through the mind without needing to be understood. It is said that memory gathers in the hush after what does not happen. When the storm fails to arrive, the world becomes strangely attentive. Every sound feels clearer, every shadow feels deeper. The desert listens not for drops, but for the possibility of them, and in that listening, the past rises. We begin with the ocean, because even the driest places carry the weight of ancient water. Beneath layers of dust and time, shells turned to stone remain like small sacred tokens. Coral forms sleep in sediment. The land, once pressed under tides, still carries the ocean's slow memory. The dunes in moonlight look like frozen waves, as if the sea never truly left, only learned a quieter shape. Whispers tell us that the desert still tastes salt when it dreams. Then comes the river, a river that lost its name. A dry channel winding through sand like a forgotten sentence. Once it fed forests and villages now erased. Now it lies silent, a curve of absence that still guides the wind. The river's voice has withdrawn, but its path remains, etched into the earth like a prayer that has been spoken so often it no longer needs sound. Some believe the river did not vanish. It simply stopped speaking aloud. Then the lake, immense, prehistoric, a mirror beneath the stars. Its surface once held constellations, trembling with reflected light. People may have sat at its edges, watching the sky twice, above and below, feeling suspended between worlds. Now, the basin is dust and salt, yet its shape remains. At night the stars still hover over it, as if expecting to be mirrored. Perhaps the lake still reflects, but only inward. Then the garden, vanished, yet present in footprints, hardened into stone. Those footsteps remain one of the most tender offerings of time. They suggest a life lived with water as companion, not conquest. They suggest daily rituals, pauses, art, ceremony. A softness often forgotten when we imagine the ancient past. The earth held those prints like a blessing, then dried and changed, leaving the marks behind as quiet evidence that humanity once walked here gently. Beneath the silence, those footsteps still lead somewhere. And above all these fragments, ocean, river, lake, garden, there is the sky. The sky that once breathed with clouds. Monsoon winds once traveled farther north, carrying moisture like a gift. Rain-heavy heavens gathered above grasslands and waterholes. Rock art still shows boats and fish and raised hands, as if the people were greeting the clouds the way one greets a returning friend. Tonight, the clouds do not return, but the sky remembers. It is said that the climate moves like a tide, advancing, retreating, returning in cycles older than language. The planet breathes in long rhythms, too slow for a single life to witness fully, yet steady enough to shape everything. Wet eras and dry eras, green veils lifted and lowered, lakes appeared and receded, rivers changed course. The world turned quietly, without asking permission. And in the aftermath, after the rain that does not fall, what remains is not emptiness, but pause, a sacred uncertainty. This chapter does not offer answers, because the desert rarely does. It offers something else, a stillness that holds many truths at once. The knowledge that water was here, and the knowledge that it is not here now. The understanding that both conditions are part of a greater rhythm. Some believe the land is never truly barren, only resting. In the deep calm of night, the desert feels less like absence and more like a temple without walls. The sand is a soft floor, the stars are the ceiling, the wind is a slow chant moving through invisible corridors. If you imagine the storm that never arrives, you can almost hear the first drops, the way they would have struck the dunes, darkening the sand in delicate circles. You can almost smell the rain scent rising, earthy and ancient, like incense released from stone. You can almost feel the air shift into coolness, the world briefly softened by water's touch. But the drops do not come. And so we are left with what remains when water withdraws. A land that remembers, a sky that continues, a silence that is not empty, but full. Beneath the silence, the desert holds its echo like a secret lullaby. This is not the lullaby of comfort alone. It carries melancholy too, the gentle ache of lost reflections, of vanished lakes, of river names dissolved, of green grasses that once whispered under wide clouds. Yet the melancholy is soft, not sharp. It is the kind that invites acceptance rather than sorrow. A mourning without grief. Because the desert does not mourn the way we do. It holds, it preserves, it waits. Marked by the moon, the dunes glow faintly, their ridges silvered. Shadows settle into troughs like still water. For a moment the landscape resembles a frozen sea, oceanic, undulating, calm. The illusion is tender, as if the land is showing us what it once was, not to cause pain, but to remind us that nothing is fixed. Even dryness is temporary on a long enough scale. Some believe that one day, far beyond our counting, clouds may return in fullness. That monsoon winds may travel north again, that basins may refill, that grasses may rise, that the Sahara may wear green once more, like a veil returned to a resting face. Or perhaps it will not. Perhaps the cycle will turn differently. The sacred uncertainty is not a problem to solve. It is a space to rest within. Where memory fades, peace can begin. And so, the chapter's final image comes gently. The desert under moonlight, vast and still. No storm, no rainfall, no dramatic ending. Only the quiet land breathing in its own way, holding the echo of rain as if it were a song taught long ago and never fully forgotten. The stars remain overhead, ancient and watchful. The wind moves softly across sand, sounding faintly like distant surf. faintly like leaves, faintly like water that is not here. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, the echo is enough. Perhaps the rain was never meant to arrive. Perhaps the waiting is the ritual. Perhaps the desert's greatest secret is not what it has lost, but what it still holds, patiently, quietly, beneath its veil of dust. And as your breath slows, as the mind drifts towards sleep, the desert's hush becomes your own. The land continues to listen, the sky continues to remember, and the silence after the rain, after what did not happen, wraps around you like a calm, ancient hymn, a secret lullaby, a soft, sacred pause. And then, gently, the world fades into quiet.